But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." This is an excerpt from Edgar Allan Poe's Nevermore, one of his most famous works. His poetry featured haunting phenomena like strange occurrences or insane murderous men. He is credited for the creation of the detective mysteries that we have come to know and love, and worked as a critic and came to criticize the works of Rufus Wilmot Griswold, who would later attempt to ruin his name. Poe had a bit of a past, which may come to explain his morbid works. This Edgar Allan Poe is one we aren't quite familiar with. He was in fact born to traveling actors in Boston, January 19, 1809, second to last of 3 children. His siblings would coincidentally grow up to become involved with writing like Poe. However, at the age of 3, Poe's parents died, and he was separated from his siblings when a couple took him in. His foster parents wanted Poe to get into business, but Poe had no intention of becoming a businessman. He enjoyed writing poetry, much so that by the age of 13 he had accumulated enough poetry to create a book, but he would not publish a book until much later. In 1826, Poe left Richmond, the town he grew up in, to attend the University of Virginia. Although he excelled in his classes, he accumulated much debt. This is due to the fact that his foster father, John Allan, had not given Poe the needed amount of money. As a result, Poe suffered immensely. Humiliated and furious at Allan, he left university and returned to Richmond. There he visited Almira Royster, the woman he was engaged to. Unfortunately for Poe, she had gotten engaged with another. He was heartbroken, and while living with his fosters, the hostility towards Allan had increased. He stormed out frustrated, this time with the ambition for glory and greatness. 2 years after publishing his first book and enlisting in the army, he came to discover that his mother figure was dying of tuberculosis. He rushed to see her, but she had just been buried. He and Allan made up, and Allan helped Poe gain an appointment to the United States Military Academy. He published more poetry, but while at the academy he discovered that Allan had remarried and did not tell Poe. He published another book and got kicked out. Poe was in a poor state, and decided to go to his late father's home in Baltimore. There he met relatives, cousins that robbed him upon arrival, and Poe's Aunt Maria Clem, who invited him into her home and introduced Virginia Clem, her daughter, into his life. Yes, Virginia Clem and Poe were cousins, but despite that fact, he fell in love. Allan died later on and failed to include Poe in his will, who was at the time living in poverty. But that soon changed when he began to publish his short stories and won a contest. Through a series of events, he ended up becoming a magazine writer. Life was going well for Poe. He made the magazine the most popular in the area with his stories and harsh book reviews. It was at this point in his life where he was known as the brutal critic, and came to judge Rufus Griswold's work. He brought his aunt and cousin to Richmond and married Virginia, who was not yet 14. They still had a happy marriage. Later on, he moved to New York City, as he was dissatisfied with the control he had over the magazine. He was unsuccessful, so he left yet again with Philadelphia in mind. Here he wrote for many magazines, barely making ends meet, and was helping the cause for copyright laws and higher wages for writers. That was until tragedy struck. His wife had contracted tuberculosis, the disease that had taken many of his loved ones. Despite this, Poe moved back to New York in 1844 and caused a sensation with a false story involving a hot air balloon. It was here where he published The Raven. This made him famous and able to demand better pay. Life had improved. He published 2 books and began running his very own magazine. This did not last, however, as he was driven out into a tiny country cottage. It was then when his wife had died in the winter of 1847 at the age of 27. Poe was devastated and couldn't write for months. After his period of grief, Poe traveled from city to city giving lectures. When he came to Massachusetts, he met a woman named Nancy Richmond, who became a platonic love of his. It boosted his spirits. He then attempted to court some ladies. After trial and error, he found out that the woman he was first engaged with was newly widowed. He courted her. They both thought they were engaged again, but then Poe had unexpectedly disappeared when he stopped in Baltimore, Philadelphia. 5 days later, they found him in a bar room of a political house in critical condition. He was sent to a hospital where he spent the last days of his life. Neither his mother-in-law nor fiancée knew what had happened until they read in the newspapers that he had died, October 7, 1849, at 40 years of age. There have been many theories on how Edgar Allan Poe died, but the exact cause of death remains a mystery to this day. Nevertheless, Edgar Allan Poe will always remain one of the best writers of all time.